And we're live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today. Hope those of you who have been with us most of this weekend have been enjoying Freedonia Con. Um, I am joined today by some wonderful folks. I love that background, Cliff.
Thanks.
Um, and one of the things that has obviously been kind of a big um, development in tabletop gaming space over the last few years as the internet proliferation and the ease of production and streaming and all sorts of things have started to spread out is actual play podcasts, actual play games, whether streaming on Twitch, whether recorded and released later, and that sort of thing. And obviously, with the massive recognition of Critical Role, which is in the streaming space, the 800-pound gorilla of actual play podcasting or actual play production compared to everything else that's out there. Um, One of the ways that often gets brought up in discussions about Earthdawn and 1879 and FASA properties is trying to make people aware of these games and these properties. And one way to do that is by producing a podcast that shows, or a Twitch stream or whatever, that shows people playing the game and introducing people to the setting and so forth. In fact, there's a whole community out there that consumes their RPG content purely through these avenues, that they don't have a local group or home game, or they are people who don't like playing but like sharing in those stories and worlds. So I've got some people on here with me today that kind of take part of this community. We can start, let's see, in my little window here. I'm Josh. Obviously, I am one of the development team for Earthdawn. I am also a player in an actual play podcast. And if you have listened to my non AP podcast, Legends of Earthdawn, I recently dropped several episodes from a one shot that I ran for another uh, AP crew, the Crit Show. I did an Earthdawn one shot for them. So I've got some experience, but I also wanted to bring on some other people. So we will go off, we will start that way with Matty. Introduce yourself
Oh,
and tell us about your show, and we'll go from there.
well, good morning, everybody. My name is Matty, and I game master and do the audio work, audio work, for Radio Free Earthdawn, which is the newest of the shows represented in this panel, and it's probably the worst. I think that's a fair admission to make.
All right.
That's
And
about it.
okay, great. Moving clockwise around, we'll go over to Rob.
All right, just checking my mic is working here. Good. Yeah, my name's Rob. I'm the GM, and I do the audio editing for Namegivers actual play podcast, as well as the Bonyards and Boojums 1879 podcast. And we got started as a just a friendly game. Kind of started from people that I played with years and years ago, and it all came about from actually listening to Legends of Earthdawn. Um, Listen to that, and I before then I didn't get the actual play podcast. I do another podcast, has nothing to do with this, but I didn't get the actual play community until I saw that there was an Earthdawn one, a system I actually knew from a long time ago. I was like, oh, listen to this, and I was so pleasantly surprised that in listening to Cliff, I was like, wow, way back in the day when I was GMing, I had no one to compare to at all. So I never knew, am I doing good? Am I not? There was no way to know. It was the 90s, early 2000. But finally hearing someone else GM really got me back into it. So thanks, Cliff. And yeah, we got some of our old group back together. I originally just started recording just so I could hear myself and see how I was doing as a GM, and so I could improve my skills. But started listening to stuff and going, you know what, these players are really good, and I'm not doing too badly. And so we started talking about releasing the recording. So yeah, that's how we got into it. Yeah.
Cliff.
Hi, I'm Cliff, also known as Mr. Johnson of the Arcology podcast. But yeah, I'm here to talk mainly about the Legends of Earthdawn actual play. It's yeah, something that I guess I originally started because Earthdawn was sort of my white whale of RPGs. It was a game that I had read a lot about, but never really got a good game going that stuck. And bumped into Josh here at Gen Con a couple of years and floated the idea of doing a podcast. And he was interested. And yeah, for me, it's an excuse to play Earthdawn, but I also was already doing some actual play work with Shadowrun stuff and some other things with the Shadowcasters Network. It just seemed natural to sort of put it in the framework of doing an actual play, and sort of having that built there kind of helps fuel the campaign as well. And we have really great players too.
As I seem to recall from that conversation, you came and talked to me about it. My response was, as long as all I have to do is show up and play.
I try to make it easy on you. Yep. Not too much of a time commitment, once a month, and yep, just show up and play, and it's been great fun.
Yeah, we've been going, what, is that 3 calendar years now that we've been playing that?
Something like
campaign?
that.
It's
Maybe
been-
more hard. I don't know.
I'm
I'm
gonna
getting
go
to
pull
an
up
age
my-
now where, yeah.
And time is really weird right now anyway.
Right.
Okay, so Matty, what, being the newest sort of member of this community, what inspired you? What drew you into deciding to do an actual play show?
Well, it's a bit like Rob, actually. I too was heavily inspired by Cliff, and by yourself as well, Josh. You offered me some encouragement once upon a time.
Okay.
Earthdawn is the first game I've tried to do this with, which is, because I like it and I wanted to play it always, which is not easy to do when you live in a country that doesn't really have a tabletop gaming culture. We just don't have the local friendly game stores. You don't get to meet other players locally. So it's got to be online. So may as well record it. And I just wanted to do it for myself and a couple of my friends. And then you offered me some encouragement, and we decided to release to the wider world as a result of that. Does that help?
That
I'm
does
not sure.
that does answer the question.
I forget what the
So
question was.
I don't remember I know that I often throw encouragement and kudos and so forth to people whenever I can online, and so I don't remember our particular interaction, but I appreciate
That's all right.
you.
You're a busy chap.
So Rob, you brought up actually an interesting point that I hadn't really thought about before when I was doing some of the preliminary thoughts about this panel, and that is using the actual play experience, listening to an actual play podcast and using that as a way to compare yourself to other game masters and sort of maybe not necessarily learning how to GM, but do you think that's a something that was perhaps maybe not looked for as an idea behind the AP scene, but that is something that people who might be nervous about running their own games could take from
Yeah, I
from
think
a show?
so. Yeah, it's like I said, in the 90s, early 2000s. I mean, unless you were hanging around other games or got yourself as a player into a game, there's no one to compare yourself with, especially, I mean, back then, I think I was the only person I knew of running an Earthdawn game, at least in university. In high school, I'd learned from a teacher, believe it or not. They're the ones that got us started, and because they were running a game, and then that teacher wanted to run a gaming club, and they brought this new game back in '95 to us, and GM'd it, and then all my friends wanted to play, and I kind of drew the short straw, I guess, for being a GM, and became kind of a forever GM. But I never really knew whether it was, is it because I'm the one who wants to do it, or am I doing any good at all? I don't know. But yeah, having actual documented games to listen to is a huge boost because once university ended and people moved on, I didn't really have a connection with the local community for gaming because I was new to the city. So I didn't know anybody, and it just kind of faded away for me for a while. And having that AP helped a lot for me to visualize actually doing it again because I, in my head, was always like, well, I got to organize people. I got to make sure there's space people can be in. I got to have like so many hours booked up. I got to, account for everyone's schedule and just all this huge mess. And I'm like, yeah, I do that enough for work and other things. I don't want to deal with that. But when it came down to, hey, you can do this on Discord, and I thought about it for a little bit after listening to Legends of Earthdawn. I went, you know what? We always played kind of theater of the mind style. I never knew the term at the time, but we never used miniatures. We didn't really use maps or anything like that. As long as we have a dice roller or something like that, yeah, we could do it. And so I think that served as a bit of an inspiration. And then later on, it was more now that I knew the genre of actual play a little better because I had a way in through Earthdawn. I listened to some other ones that more modern systems that like narrative driven ones, which can really, I think, help a GM get their, I don't know, just give them ideas and things of how to, if there's too much silence, how to fill in the silence, when to stop and listen, when to give silence so that you're letting your players think. Things like that. It's what I've learned over time.
Comment from the Discord chat. Falal mentions that he doesn't know about learning, but he's definitely become less self-conscious after listening to all of you guys, which I presume it means he listens to multiple shows, which definitely helped boost the confidence. Yeah, there's I don't know if Cliff, you've heard of what's sometimes called the Matt Mercer effect, to again kind of refer to Critical Role and the incredible talent that these professional voice actors and performers kind of bring to their show every week. And a lot of people who are only exposed perhaps to the granddaddy or the gorilla, as I put it. Do you think that is something that having a variety of shows, especially for the same system where we've got the Legends game, we've got Matty, we've got Rob, doing the same game system, but running their own campaigns with varying levels of experience. Do you think that variety and making that variety available is something that can help game masters, again, even if they're not necessarily going for an actual play situation, to run their own games?
Yeah, sure. That's a very good point. Critical Role is, you see the level of production that they have, the equipment involved, the level of attention to detail with the miniatures and how everything is built there. And yeah, most people could look at that and go, well, that's not something I can accomplish. But to hear any of our actual play podcasts here, just get together some good players who are good at bouncing ideas off each other and really role playing their characters to the hilt and leading into the system and having fun with it and really looking for ways to explore the lore. I think you can listen to that and go, oh, yeah, I can do that. Or I know one of the reasons why I would sort of pursue and look for a lot of different actual play podcasts that I've discovered over the years is that I'm curious about a system and I want to find out about it. And by listening to an actual play, that makes it more accessible to me than I would get just by, say, picking up the rule book and trying to read it and figure it out just from that. So yeah, having that example at multiple different sort of approaches to production as well is nice. I, for one, my aesthetic towards producing an actual play for that reason is to leave in almost all of the rules talk. I know a lot of actual plays like to cut all of that out, so you just sort of get something closer to an audio drama. It's a lot more tight, and I appreciate that style as well. But the one that I really like to do is to invite someone to the gaming table to experience it as if they're there with us, and you hear about it and learn about the game. And yeah, I guess that makes it fairly accessible. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge and say thanks to the two of you guys here for saying what you did about the Legends of Earthdawn podcast, inspiring what you did. So that's always really lovely to hear, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you.
I might add a little bit to there. I think also it was helpful to me that Legends of Earthdawn wasn't trying to go for a big production value type of thing, or, clean audio and crisp cutting or anything like that, because to me, listening to that sounded like listening to just a normal Discord game, if that makes sense. And that made it easier in my mind to say, oh, we can just do this, because as long as the players can hear each other and understand each other, then the audience is going to be able to hear you talking and understand you. And that's all that's really important for that. I mean, I love high production ones too, but that's a different thing. And I love these as well because you get a real sense of authenticity, I think.
So let's step away from that for a moment and talk a little bit about the more technical side of production, because if somebody is in the listening now or catching this on YouTube later or something like that and wants to explore producing their own AP show, what would be the tools? What tools do you use? What tools would you recommend? Is there anything that you think is essential? Is there anything you think that it's nice but you can wait until later? Like, how basic can somebody go? How about, again, as sort of the newest player in the field, Matty, what kind of setup do you guys have for your production and sort of production pipeline?
Well, that is super basic and super entry level, and it costs practically nothing. We play in Discord. We do voice in Discord. We record with the Craig Discord bot, which has gotten better over the last few years. We've only had one lost session to it. Most people who've given it a try have given it one session and then just, no, this is crap. We'll go back to our tried and true methods. But we didn't have any tried and true methods, so we're relying on Craig, and it's mostly good for us. Editing is in Audacity, which is freeware, and it's a $15 a month Libsyn account, which is more than enough for our uploading needs. And no one gets paid anything, which greatly simplifies things, I think. It's a loss leader.
Do you mind if I ask what settings do you use for Craig?
It just records, and I take the multi-track download option that is offered at the end.
It's been a long time since I used it. I remember he sort of dialed in something about the bitrate, but maybe that was on the side of your Discord settings.
Yeah, I think that's gone away now. It's super simple now.
I seem to recall that when we started up, Cliff, we tried Craig or something very similar to it in our first session or two and found that it wasn't working for us at the time.
I've recorded multiple sessions with Craig, and yeah, I found I had problems. I'm glad it works well for some people, and it probably works well now. I use a different method that I found more reliable, but yeah, I was just curious what you've been using Craig for and how you've been using it. So you've been having good results.
Well, we have results. People are split as to whether or not they're good. As for actual mics and stuff, we use whatever we've got lying around. I ask that people don't use a Bluetooth microphone because I hate Bluetooth and it sounds awful. And anyone who's ever used Bluetooth will know that. Other than that,
certainly if you're going to be going for something that is going to be post-produced in some manner, even if it's just kind of basic, like lining up the multi-track recording or whatever, the compression that you're going to get on that happens on that communication between the Bluetooth mic and the computer where it's doing the recording, like the number of levels of compression that happen between the person speaking and the final recording is going to affect your final outcome. And that's absolutely something that you want to keep in mind. Even just going to a straight up simple USB headset mic or something is going to be a big difference over a Bluetooth. I obviously, you can't really see it in my frame here, but I've upgraded my rig recently. I've now got an actual XLR and audio interface that I recently picked up. And you can definitely tell that. Anything different that you do in your flow, Rob, with
Yeah, so I mean, we do use Craig. We have had issues a couple of times. Craig has had some stability issues the last few months. We found out, though, that there is a backup bot that if you insert to your server, it's Geark. It's the exact opposite of the word Craig, just reverse the name Craig. And it's a secondary bot. So if Craig crashes, it's there, backup recording. So I always recommend if someone takes Craig, take Geark as well, too. We did have at least one lost session. I don't know what happened to that. We actually have a couple more lost sessions coming up that I have to figure out how to deal with. I'm planning things for that. And that was kind of more of a user error on my end, I think. I either thought I had downloaded them and didn't on one case. In the other case, I think I hit download, thought it downloaded, and ended up with a 0 kilobit file when I went to check it a couple weeks later. And Craig only keeps files for 1 week, so you got to check it and verify it early. Yeah, the nice thing about Craig, though, is you don't have to do any lining up of audio multi-track. If you were doing local recordings, there's always audio drift. But with Craig, because it is literally just recording what went into Discord, it's all lined up perfectly as it was. So even if you did go with local recording, I would tell people probably use Craig anyways, because then you can use it as a reference for lining tracks up. But yeah, we use that. I usually these days I just download the FLAC file. I used to download the Audacity file and run it all through Audacity. These days I'm more into using non-destructive DAWs. So I use Audacity only for the truncate silence feature because I can't seem to get that working in anything else. And it's great for, deleting that 5 seconds of silence as someone's figuring out what's going on. Yeah, I figure you must be.
That's how we get the Earthdawn Survival Guide episodes from an hour 15 down to an hour 8.
Yep. And that's our 2-hour sessions are never more than like an hour 40 because of that. And these days I'm using a program called Reaper. It's one of the least expensive DAWs. You can try it out for free, and I think it's just nagware, actually. I think you can keep using it for a while. But it's only like $60, I think. But it's a nice non-destructive editor that takes a bit to learn because it's very different than Audacity in a lot of ways, but been very helpful for a lot of things. So yeah, my methodology is usually get those FLAC files, get it into Audacity, truncate silence, export it out, bring it into Reaper so that I can basically then make an export with all the levels done so I can listen to it and figure out what I'm cutting. If I'm in a rush, which I'm not as much these days, but I used to be, I would like listen back to the recording at like 2 times speed or something. Because it's not like I don't know what's happening. I mean, I know exactly what's happening because I was GMing it, but I can then at least write down the notes of like, oh, this person went to the bathroom at this time and probably should cut that. Or we spent 3 minutes paging through the book with non-useful rules. I don't mind talking about rules like Cliff, but if it's like 3 minutes of us, I think it's here. No, it's here. No, it's in this other part. Cut those.
I don't leave all the rules talking either, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and then I come back later, and lately I've been, and then I cut stuff, and then lately I've also been adding some music tracks in because I did that once and as a test, and I was like, oh wow, this really is a lot better with some music in the background. And I kind of felt like, oh, now I'm obliged, even though it's going to take me longer. It's nice. And our first trial run of it was the 1879 podcast, actually. And people really commented right away. They loved the music. And they're like, are you going to do that in Namegivers? And I'm like, I guess. Yes, I am now.
How about you, Cliff?
My process is pretty similar to what's been discussed. I use TeamSpeak instead of Discord because I've found it more reliable. And I've got a friend who runs a Discord server, a TeamSpeak server for us that we use for that. So it's very handy. If you don't have a friend who's running a TeamSpeak server for you, it's probably less handy, but that's not been my experience. So just record everything on TeamSpeak. TeamSpeak now it's had a built-in recording feature for a long time. I know it's just this really obscure voice chat program that people remember from early MMO days, basically. But yeah, I find it useful for using it to as a venue for recording the actual plays. It now has a multi-track recording feature as well, which is pretty nice. And yep, I use Audacity specifically and only for the truncate silence feature, which nothing else has that as far as I've noticed. And I just use the default settings, right? It's amazing. I just drop it in there, process it, export it, and then I plop it into my DAW of choice, which is Studio One. I just love the workflow interface for working with and editing audio. It's really handy. Also, there's a free version of that one as well called Studio One Prime, which is pretty limited on features as far as music production goes. But as far as podcast stuff, it probably has everything you need. The only other major technical thing I want to point out about producing and audio quality goes is, well, also to say that a USB headset mic is kind of that's the bare minimum. Somebody just using something you just plug in with a cable directly into the computer probably isn't going to sound great. And I haven't heard the Bluetooth problem, but so good to know. I'll avoid that one. But the other really big thing on audio quality is, actual clear, super crisp, really, really nice sounding audio. It's nice, but it's a luxury. What's really super, super important is having some control over your dynamic range such that your volume levels are fairly consistent. The quieter stuff is almost as loud as the louder stuff. I can't tell you how many actual play podcasts I've listened to, say, driving in the car or something, where you turn up the volume really loud to hear everybody talk, and then suddenly something happens and everybody starts laughing, and it's shockingly loud. I won't sit through those. Learn to use a device called compression. Normalizing helps too, but it's not the whole thing. I think Audacity has a feature in it that has a special name for it called Leveler or something like that. But yeah, make sure you dial things in.
There's an add-on. There's an app called Levelator that is limited. You can drop a it doesn't work on MP3s. It works on WAV files, but you basically drop a WAV file into it, and it basically runs basically sets everything to the same level. And you need to do some work on it afterwards to kind of clean things up, because the default, you can't really play with the settings at all. Levelator is really good if you are doing just like straight spoken word stuff. It doesn't help much if you're dealing with a whole bunch of other background things. You can do that in Audacity, but it requires multiple like passes through various tools and whatnot to really get the same effect.
Yeah, with as Rob said, in non-destructive DAW, which is going to be almost all of them, basically, except for Audacity these days. You have a device called a compressor or compression, and what that does is, in technical terms, you tell it, hey, if the volume level gets this loud, turn it all down to within this range. And then everything essentially gets turned down quieter. And then at the other end, you have a thing to turn the gain up. So everything gets turned up together, so that essentially you have to sort of play with the settings to get it to work right, even from one session to another with the same group. But a good rule of thumb is a 4-to-1 ratio, threshold of about -18 dB. And then you just got to boost it how you want. Sometimes just use the auto gain feature. It'll just make it up for it and try to give you the most optimal level. And that can work well in some cases. But your goal is to have essentially no more than about 6 or so decibel range between the loudest and the quietest parts of when you have sound going through. If you got that, then people can listen on their headphones while they're mowing the lawn and they can hear you. That's a specific feedback I've gotten that someone's given me that made me feel very proud, is I can listen to your podcast when I'm mowing the lawn and wearing headphones.
And so Cliff started getting into some real like technical talking decibels and random stuff like that, which if you're following this and have no idea what he's talking about, that's fine. A lot of the sort of introductory level tools and automated plugins and stuff that are out there for various DAWs, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation, by the way, in case people didn't know. It, you know, allows someone who is not necessarily looking for a like professional studio level quality end product to be able to just run it through, like Levelator, for example. You can just run it through and it'll do 90 to 95% of the work for you. And then once you get to that starting point that's good, if it's like with me, because I kind of started in this via wanting to narrate audiobooks, you start picking up other tips and getting into more advanced things. And then at that point, you just start following blogs and YouTube channels of people talking about stuff, and it can become its whole additional thing. So it sounds like most of you don't really do, like you talk about the truncate silence, you know, clearing out some of the longer dead space and kind of going back through the, you know, and going, okay, here we were just basically going like, I can't find it in the book for 3 minutes as you're trying to figure out a rules call, and those sorts of things get cropped. But generally speaking, it sounds like you all just kind of go for that sitting at the table with the group kind of feel, and mention that the higher production, or, you know, the more polished perhaps, or more heavily edited experiences have their value and can be very entertaining, but not necessarily what you're going for. And that sounds to me like would perhaps be something that a new person to the scene would be better served as going for, because there's less pressure from a post-production standpoint. But roughly speaking, how long, if we factor in the amount of time actually playing the session, about how long would it take, would you say, for your entire process from starting the recording of the session to dropping the episode into the feed? How long would you say that process is? Obviously it's not done all at once, but what's the sort of time frame that you see on that for your process, Matty?
Well, I don't use auto truncate as part of my editing process. I've tried it, and it makes me and it makes my players sound like we're idiots. It just doesn't work for the way that we talk. So I'm about 2 hours of editing into 1 hour of raw audio to manually truncate our sentences together to make it sound intelligible. I mean, you can hear it in the way that I'm talking now. There are these pauses, and it takes a bit of work to make us intelligible that way. 2 hours editing on an hour of raw audio, and we get about 40 minutes out of that. And I generally get to start shortly after we finish playing. First edit pass of my episodes is generally complete within 2 days of playing, and uploaded into the feed for future release within a week. So it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of extra time. If I could get auto truncate to work, it'd be great, but just can't. Doesn't do it for us.
How about you, Rob?
Yeah, because we kind of started the podcast later than we had recordings for, we have a kind of a naturally based lag in there, about a 6-week lag between the playtimes and the release. I go in waves. Sometimes I have like a 6-week backlog ready to go, and I just put them out there for weekly. And sometimes it's that week I am, taking the one from 6 weeks ago and finally putting it together. It varies, but my general, I would say after the playing, which for us, it's basically usually weekly, 2-hour sessions. So there's that couple hours. Then there's the roughly couple hours of listening to it again for me to kind of make notes. I guess maybe throw in 20-minute time there of doing the auto truncate and export to Reaper and then have it export. A lot of that time I'm not doing anything. I'm just having the computer do things. But yeah, listening to it, make a quick note of spots to do quick cuts in, which usually is about 10, 15 minutes of stuff if it's not too hairy. Then the intro, outro, and music, that's a bit more like half an hour to an hour, depending on what I need to do. Because sometimes I'm just getting new to the music thing, adding that in, and that's a whole nother complication. And for a while, it was taking a lot longer than it probably should have. Now I've kind of figured out that I should probably go in advance and download the tracks I need beforehand, and then use like from that limited number in an episode. Because previously I was just going, okay, I'm at this point, I want new music, and I go to the filmmusic.io site, which is all Creative Commons music, and I start searching for something for that scene. That takes me forever to do it that way. So I'll make a little collection in advance and then kind of select from that of things of different moods and tones and things. But yeah, I don't know what that all adds up to, but probably 4 or 5 hours in addition to the 2 hours of the actual session. And then, of course, the time planning and stuff like that, I'm sure, is a few hours too.
How about you, Cliff?
I think as for me, about I think roughly 4 times the amount of time that it would take if we were just playing the game. So if we have an hour of content release, that's about 4 hours worth of work. Maybe 5 or 6 times if I'm totally counting in the actual time spent playing the game, because that gets cut down to a smaller amount and some of it gets edited out. But yeah, process and all, about 4 hours for every hour. It's not that bad of an overall time commitment, and a lot of the work can be like, yeah, for truncate silence, that's going to be 15 minutes, but it's 15 minutes that I can go wander off while my computer does all the hard work. And for the actual editing, it's fun to listen to. Go back and listen to the stories. I laugh along with a lot of the moments. I don't know if any of y'all have experienced this where something is coming up. Maybe it's been a while since you've listened to it. Like in my case, my backlog is way more than 6 weeks. Something will come up and I'll go like, oh man, I wish I would have done this here. And then the next thing that happens is like, I do that thing. And like, oh, cool. I'm glad I did that thing that I thought of months ago. and that's kind of fun too. But I also want to share the tip that if you're just doing something where you're like listening to something, letting it go, and occasionally sort of jumping into edit, but mostly you're just sort of listening to it as it goes. It can be nice to have sort of a simple, chill, low computer resources game that you can pause at a moment's notice. Like Minecraft or Space Engineers, or well, Space Engineers isn't low impact, but I have to turn the settings way down. But you can just sort of get lost in doing something and not pay too much attention to the game, but be fiddling around with that, and it doesn't seem like so much work. And you just occasionally hit pause and go back and edit out when somebody had to go to the bathroom or whatever. So that's an editing tip I got from Justin Deal of Hidden Grid Shadowrun podcast. He specifically suggested Minecraft, but really any game that you can pause and it's chill and doesn't take too much of your attention is sort of a nice way to pass the time while you're editing big chunks of audio.
Yeah, just to your point there, like I do something similar, but what I'll do is I'll export the actual session into an MP3, throw it on a private feed, and listen to it myself on while I'm out walking, driving, whatever, and then just make notes for later editing. So that's another way you can do that as well.
If I'm being honest, I do the same as Rob when I'm feeling particularly lazy and not editing right after we play.
I also find, though, one interesting thing was because we're in that few weeks of a backlog, I'll hear something that the player says, that I didn't pay enough attention to, or that I just forgot about at one point, and I'll go, hey, I might bring that back as a plot point now, or something that, this little off thing that someone said, oh, I'd really love to have a spider as a pet someday, but that's not in the system. Someone says something like that, and I'm like, maybe that could be a thing somehow later on. And so I brought that in, like, for example. So it's sometimes I'll use things that I hear from those sessions a few weeks later, and I'll just use it as a way to bring something in that players will love, and it might seem like I pre-planned something in the plot, but I didn't.
Yeah, you've got to just toss out those seeds, and then later on you see which ones are sprouting, and
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
it works great for that.
yeah, it makes you seem like you've done all this planning, but it's really just a matter of like scattering some seeds and seeing which ones bear fruit.
Definitely.
Well, that brings me to another sort of topic related to all of this, and that is, while all of the shows seem to have a real sense of just sitting down at the table with the crew and not necessarily playing, but being able to kind of sit there and feel a part of that. Is there anything that you find, if you have experience with non AP game mastering or anything like that, is there anything that you find is different from how you approach GMing a show that you know is going to have an audience compared to what you might be doing like just for your regular game group Friday nights or however that goes?
For myself, I would say no, not really. I actually tend to find my personal philosophy is if it's a good game for the players, it's going to be a good game to listen to. So I think that those two things can line up perfectly.
Less profanity. Much,
And there's
much
that.
less profanity. And the players feel the same. I got notice of the questions ahead of time. I asked my players if there's anything they do for the podcast they do differently, and some of them have been on other shows as well. And they're the same. It's less profanity, less profanity, less profanity. And that's it. That's all we do different.
I'd say for Legends of Earthdawn, it's just pretty much the raw game as it happens. I don't really plan anything out differently than I would for an action or for running an off the air campaign. My goal, the thing I'm going for when I go to GM a session of Legends of Earthdawn, is I want my players to have a really good time, and for it to be cool. um, and that's what I'm shooting for. And I'd say initially, yeah, at least for the first year or more, there was that sort of nervousness measure of like, I've got the line developer of the game I'm running here as one of my players, so there's a certain level of like wanting to be on your A game of that. But I sort of used that as a positive motivator, I think. And
I hope
but
I
yeah, I'm
didn't make things
just
too hard for you.
oh no, it's been great fun, and you've been very sort of welcoming and generous with your lack of berating me for not getting things right.
Plus, it's got to be less pressure having a kind of co-GM around, I would have to say, right?
Yeah, I can lean on him for a lot of stuff from time to time. For like, hey, I can just go. I just can comfortably just go to the side. Hey, is there something in the lore here that's contradicting this idea that I'm bringing up? Okay, cool. And more often than not, he's just having fun with it, especially with this certain wooden heart that's popped up that hasn't
Well,
really had much
I
airtime
was going
yet
to say
in the
that
podcast.
hasn't, yeah, that hasn't showed up in the actual released episodes yet. When we get out of the care, that
Yeah, I got to finish
Oh,
dealing with Zorg. Oh my God, that was a slog. Oh,
must say I had a good laugh though when you introduced that plot point, and Josh was like, "I'm just going to put that away for now." I found that entertaining.
oh, question from the Discord chat: how often do I text Morgan for rules questions? I don't actually do it generally when we're playing. Um, I have done it when we've been recording. I've done it once or twice when we've been recording the survival guide, because we start going on about something, and I'm like, because early on I was a little bit more cavalier with answering questions and whatnot, and would say something on the show, and Morgan would get mildly annoyed with me, not necessarily because I was wrong, but because my off the cuff answer to something on the show might, because of my position within FASA and within Earthdawn, might be taken as authoritative in a way that I didn't really intend it. Um, but no, um, I handle the situation at the in the Legends game the same way that I would if I were running or playing in a game normally. Um, where I am much like, I understand the importance, obviously, of the rule structure and the things that have been developed for it, but by the same token, I don't like bogging down the flow of a game, the flow of a narrative, the flow of play, to like kill that momentum by getting into minutiae discussions. Like, let's make a decision that seems to work and we'll go from there. And if it contradicts something later, that's fine. Even for an AP situation, I think that's a really valuable bit of demonstration to go back to what we were talking about as examples of game mastering a game system, of using that as, not necessarily explicitly so, but as a teaching moment.
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen myself, where at times we made the wrong call rules wise, but it was right for our table at the time. It certainly doesn't help that three of us were well versed with first edition and second edition, and less with fourth. So when something came up that was a difference, we just didn't know at the time. And we later go back and go, well, from here on, we'll do the fourth edition thing, but we just didn't know.
Combine that with how many different variations we go through during development, and you can understand why I am often hemming and hawing and trying to figure out what the actual final version was of something.
I try to be as hand wavy as I can about specific rules calls, unless it's very specific to a spell or ability. But I like to be able to use Earthdawn, and maybe I'm not sure if it's the ways it's not intended, but where I'll use like a talent and substitute that for some other type of test than what's explicitly there in the text of the talent, because a lot of the talents and things are very specific about how the rules work in Earthdawn. I think, honestly, I think I enjoy Earthdawn most when you play it a bit more loosely, a little bit more like a narrative, but super crunchy game.
I think that's where like Half Magic, when that was introduced, really helped the system. I remember when that was introduced back in the 90s, it's helped so much.
Yeah, Half Magic is super helpful for that. It's a really, really, really good tool to fall back on when you don't know what to reach for.
Pick an attribute, add your circle, make a roll. We're just about coming up to the end of our hour here. So if there is one thing that you that you wished you would have known before getting started producing an AP show, if there was like one piece of advice that you didn't get or you didn't find out until later, what would it be that you would pass on to somebody who's looking to get started?
I've got one.
Don't ask me. Everything.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Limit your cast size. When I was planning on doing this Earthdawn actual play, I floated the idea to a whole bunch of people, and I figured some of them would be interested, but yeah, they all wanted on board. And then I tried to accommodate that, and it was cool to a certain degree. Like, we've got that first season that sort of splits off a little bit, and then a few episodes of the Travar campaign, and that was great sort of compost for the fertile soil of the future storytelling of the overall game. But man, it was too much to do at once, and I also think I hurt some people's feelings with who ended up being on the main thing and who didn't, and some people ended up just not getting to be a part of it who were originally, and that was totally what I was trying to avoid to begin with. So setting yourself some reasonable limitations initially, and not just asking everyone you can think of who might want to be involved, that would be a clear thing that I can think of looking back. I wish I'd done differently. Everything else worked out all right.
I think I'd also say the same thing. We started off fairly small, so that was helpful. I initially was aiming for way more people than we got, and thankfully I didn't get the numbers I wanted, because I was just thinking back to the day of, when we played in the 90s, 2000s, things like that. You'd have a bunch of people around the table, and it was fine when you had 5, 6, 7 people, because you had 5, 6, 7 hours as well, usually, that you'd be doing this for, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But when you're trying to, do it in compressed amount of time and giving everybody some space, and it's online, so it's not the same as being around the table together. It's so much better to I find my sweet spot is around 4 right now, and we'll occasionally bring in a fifth, like a guest. And I'm far more comfortable now with when we have 3 people or even 2, which has happened for like some of the one shots we're doing when we don't have, like, someone's not available one week or a couple people aren't available one week. We'll do a quick one shot. I'm, as a GM, way more comfortable with that now that I've kind of cut my teeth a bit on this stuff for a while and learned from other APs and stuff. But yeah, smaller cast size is good. It's a lot less complicated.
Makes scheduling easier too.
Which actually
Definitely.
leads into a question that was just asked in the chat. How do you handle player absence? Do you postpone the session? Do you make do? Do you do a mix of things based on the situation? Is that Matty?
Yeah.
You kind of answered in the chat, but what's
if you've actually listened to it, and don't worry, I know you haven't. Anybody who's listening to this ever hasn't listened to Radio Free Earthdawn. We only have 2 players, and I got a GM PC that tags along. We can't do anything but postpone in anything that's been released. Spoiler though, we've started an 1879 campaign with more players, so maybe we'll postpone.
That's neat. Yeah, I was about to say you only had 2 cast members, so I don't think you would
Yeah.
you would have a hard time. Yeah, we do a mix of things depending on the situation and scenario. We are perfectly comfortable at times going ahead with without a player if the story isn't surrounding them specifically at the time, or if we knew in advance. There's actually I don't know if anybody's caught up to our very last one we just released last week, where one of our characters gets strangely knocked out with a plot point rather than an actual damage roll. And there's a reason, because we knew that player wouldn't be there the next session. So he's going to spend some time unconscious for the next one. So sometimes we'll do that. And yeah, if things start looking not great, we don't have a problem with skipping a week sometimes, or just let's throw it together, or some other system. Like we had that Monster Week release we did a couple weeks ago, and that was because, hey, one person wasn't available. We knew that in advance, and we were going to try out the Sponsor Week thing. And then another person said they weren't available, so we're down to 2. And I was like, yeah, why not? We'll do it with 2 people. Let's see what happens. So, yeah, totally based on the situation, I'd say.
Yeah, a bit same for me. Our group is a little bit larger, so sometimes we can absorb dropping 1 or 2 people, and I find it's really easy. The method that I like best is if you're going to carry on with a game with an absent player, whether it's for a recording or otherwise, is just having them have been somewhere off camera during all the action. They've been there doing stuff. They still get the experience points or whatever, but they've just been off camera. We just haven't been paying attention to wherever it is they've been. But yeah, I think more often than not, though, we do tend to postpone when someone's not available. I'm at a certain point in my life. Well, I remember many years ago, the idea of a gaming session getting canceled was like one of the worst things that could happen. And now I'm at a point in my life where one of the best feelings in the world is having had plans and now I have nothing planned because they were canceled. That is...
Not that we miss playing.
No, but it's just also so nice, that feeling. Even though I still kind of miss the game, I would love to play the game, but also just having that night of like, I don't have any demands on my time at all, even ones that I've chosen for myself. Wahaha! So yeah, we tend to postpone more often than soldier through.
It also helps that certainly in the Legends game, we are not beholden necessarily to a fixed release schedule. I know, Cliff, you have expressed, some like feelings about.
Yes. You can send the shame my way. I have not been good about releasing things lately,
and that's fine. And that brings up a whole other thing that we won't even get, because we're all doing this as just for fun and to share. This is not something like getting into the whole, well, is it possible to turn this into, a revenue stream, is a completely different question that we're not even going to get into. But yeah, the fact that we are sort of, the released episodes are so far behind where we are in the actual game that we're not feeling necessarily the pressure of, oh, we've got to get together so that we have some content that we can release, for next week or something along those lines.
I mean, I should say that like one of the reasons that I felt good about releasing the podcast was I felt like it might take some pressure off of Cliff for that release schedule. It's like this
Well, I
could be some
appreciate
more
it.
Earthdawn content out there, and you might have a little less like pressure of must release something.
It is nice having so many more podcasts out there now covering Earthdawn. So
All right.
I
Well,
think we were the only one at the time.
And
was
I'm
there
very
one- I was-
happy to hear Matty's doing an 1879 one because right now we're the
Yeah.
only one
yeah,
right now.
I'm happy to hear that that's been going on as well. My ability to actually listen to podcasts is very limited, so I am not anywhere near up on stuff, but I love hearing that not only Earthdawn, which is sort of our flagship line, but also now we're seeing some stuff with 1879, which I think is a setting that really deserves to get noticed out there. I don't know that much about it, but I absolutely love the conceits of the setting and the various things that can be done with it. Spoiler, I think this is actually sort of my first announcement of this. I am actually in discussion with the Crit Show folks to do an 1879 one shot for them.
Very nice. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
We only play occasionally, so ours is going to be sporadic and basically in kind of arcs, which is the way we've been doing. We started seasonal because we did a Halloween one and then a Christmas one. We're going to do one again soon, but they're going to be like every once in a while. There's going to be a couple weeks of releases, and then you won't hear from us for 2-3 months. It's basically the way it's going to go.
Cool. All right. To wrap up, where can people find your shows, Matty?
Radio Free Earthdawn on Google Podcasts and Podcast Addict, or just go to Libsyn, Radio Free Earthdawn, or one word or multiple words if you want. Just go to Libsyn. It's just so much easier.
Rob.
Because I have another podcast that's far more popular, but like I put a lot of work into it. I knew exactly where to put everything. So if there is a network you cannot find Namegivers on, and you can't just type that in, find it, let me know. Because right now you can get on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, name any podcast player, you can find it.
Cliff.
Yeah, wherever you would search for podcasts, just use the keyword Earthdawn and you'll find us and others. I'm sure it's not hard.
Because there
it should
aren't
be
very
easy to
many
find.
Earthdawn shows out there.
And we use the word Earthdawn in the title. I had to float that past Josh to see if that would fly, and he said it was probably okay, but didn't want to give me explicit permission. I'm like, all right, good enough.
Turn
But
a
yeah,
blind
Legends of
eye.
Earthdawn. legendsofearthdawn.com is our website, so there's stuff on there you can download directly or listen from there, I think. Other than that, I'm involved in a podcast network called the Shadowcasters Network. Shadowcasters.network is the website there, and I do podcasts about Shadowrun called the Arcology Podcast, including informational as well as actual play episodes, and I do stuff on the Shadowcasters Network, Twitch and YouTube channels. So recently finished up a MechWarrior Destiny actual play that we used to raise some money for world builders as well. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, and I forgot to pitch the 1879 one. Look up Bonyards and Boojums. Again, any network. Let me know if you can't find it on a network.
All right, great. Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining me here today. I hope this was informational and entertaining for everybody listening, whether live or catching this later. Thank you so much for joining us here at Freedonia Con, and have a good night.